At 2:40 in the morning, your calf muscle does not negotiate. It locks. It pulls your foot into a position you could not make on purpose if you tried. And for the next 90 seconds, you are wide awake, gripping the sheets, waiting for a knot of muscle the size of a fist to decide it is finished with you. If that scene is familiar and you are over 50, I want you to hear something that almost never gets said in a 7-minute appointment. The problem is usually not your muscle. It is usually not the banana you forgot to eat. And for a very large number of people over 50, it is not something wrong with you at all. It is something being done to you by a combination of your diet, your age, and, in many cases, a pill you swallow every single morning with your coffee. There is one mineral involved in hundreds of chemical reactions in your body, including the exact signal that tells a contracted muscle to release. When your levels run low, that release signal weakens, and the muscle that fires at 2:40 in the morning simply does not get the message to let go. Here is what makes this worth 25 minutes of your time. The ways this mineral leaves your body are almost all things you can see, name, and act on this week. In this video, I am going to name the mineral, walk you through exactly how it gets flushed out, and then do something most health videos refuse to do. I am going to show you the two major studies that tested the obvious fix, the supplement aisle fix, and found it mostly failed. And I am going to explain what that failure actually tells you about where the real solution sits. There is also one connection between this mineral and your nightly trips to the bathroom that almost nobody has ever explained to you. And by the end of this, you will understand your own body better than the last 3 doctors who waved you out the door with a shrug. So let me name it, because there is no reason to keep you waiting. The mineral is magnesium. Not calcium, not potassium, not the sodium everyone tells you to cut. Magnesium. It is the 4th most abundant mineral in the human body, and an adult carries somewhere around 25 grams of it at any given moment. That is not very much. A couple of nickels worth of weight spread across every cell you own. But here is the part that matters. More than half of it, roughly 60%, is locked away in your bones. Most of the rest sits inside your muscles and your soft tissue, and less than 1% of your total magnesium is actually floating around in your bloodstream. Hold on to that number, less than 1%, because it is going to become the single most important fact in this entire video when we get to those 2 studies. It is the reason the obvious fix fails, and almost nobody explains that connection out loud. Now, what is magnesium actually doing in there? When people say it is involved in hundreds of reactions, that sounds like the vague filler you hear on the back of a supplement bottle. So let me make it concrete, because the mechanism is the whole story. Magnesium is a required helper, what a biochemist would call a cofactor for more than 300 enzyme systems in your body. Some researchers put the number closer to 600 when you count every reaction it touches. It is essential for turning the food you eat into usable energy. Every molecule of the fuel your cells run on, a compound called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, does not actually work as pure ATP. It works as magnesium ATP. The magnesium has to be bound to it for the energy to be released. So without magnesium, the literal power supply of every muscle cell in your body starts to sputter. That is not a metaphor. That is the chemistry. But the reason we are here tonight, the reason your calf betrayed you at 2:40 in the morning, comes down to one specific job. Magnesium is the mineral that tells a contracted muscle to relax. Here is how a muscle actually works, and once you see this, the cramp makes perfect sense. When your brain fires a signal to contract a muscle, calcium comes rushing into the muscle cell. That flood of calcium is the go signal. It causes the muscle fibers to slide across each other and shorten, and that is a contraction. That is how you point your toe, grip a jar, walk up a stair. But a contraction is only useful if it ends. The muscle has to let go. And the way it lets go is by pumping that calcium back out and blocking it from flooding back in. Magnesium is what runs that pump and blocks that channel. Magnesium is the stop. It is the natural counterweight to calcium. Calcium says contract, magnesium says release. And a healthy muscle is a constant, quiet negotiation between the two. Now picture what happens when the magnesium runs low. The calcium is still there, screaming, "Go, go, go!" But the stop signal is faint. It is a whisper when it needs to be a shout. The pump that clears the calcium out slows down. The channel that should be blocked stays open a crack, and more calcium leaks in. So the muscle contracts, and then it cannot fully release. And then it contracts again, and it stacks contraction on contraction until you get that visible, rock-hard, involuntary knot. That is a cramp. A cramp is, at the cellular level, a muscle that has lost its ability to hear the word stop. And it happens at 2:40 in the morning specifically because at night your legs are still, your circulation slows, and your muscles settle into shortened positions under the blankets, which lowers the threshold for that runaway calcium loop. The magnesium shortage does not create the cramp out of nowhere. It removes the brake, and then a small trigger sets the whole thing off. So the real question becomes, why would your magnesium be low in the first place? And this is where being over 50 changes everything. Because there are 3 separate forces working against you, and most people over 50 have not one of them, but all 3 at the same time. The first force is your diet, and I am not going to lecture you about eating better in some vague way. I am going to give you the actual numbers because they are startling. The recommended daily amount of magnesium for an older man is around 420 milligrams. For an older woman, it is around 320 milligrams. Now, National Nutrition Surveys in the United States, the large ongoing study called NHANES that tracks what Americans actually eat, have found for years that a very large share of adults, on the order of half the population, does not get even the estimated average requirement from food. Read that again. Not falling a little short of some aspirational ideal, failing to hit the baseline. And it gets worse with age, because as you get older, you tend to eat less overall. Your appetite shrinks, and the foods that are richest in magnesium are often the ones people quietly drop from their plates first. Where does magnesium come from? Leafy greens like spinach and Swiss chard, because magnesium sits at the very center of the chlorophyll molecule, the way iron sits at the center of your blood. Nuts and seeds, especially pumpkin seeds and almonds. Legumes, black beans, whole grains, and dark chocolate. Now think honestly about the standard plate of someone who's been eating the modern Western diet for 50 or 60 years. White bread instead of whole grain. Processed and packaged foods where the magnesium has been stripped out during refining. When you turn a whole grain of wheat into white flour, you remove the bran and the germ, and you lose around 80% of its magnesium in the process. So it is not that people over 50 are lazy about their food. It is that the food supply itself has been quietly drained of this exact mineral for the better part of a century, and the modern plate is engineered almost perfectly to leave you short. That is the first force, low intake. But even if you ate a decent amount, the second force is working against you, and this one is nobody's fault. It is simply age. As you cross into your 50s, 60s, and 70s, 2 things change. First, your gut becomes less efficient at absorbing magnesium from the food you do eat. Studies of magnesium absorption have shown that younger adults might absorb a healthy fraction of the magnesium in a meal, but that absorption efficiency declines with age. And second, your kidneys become less efficient at holding on to it. In a young, healthy person, the kidney is a magnificent recycler. When magnesium passes through it, the kidney reabsorbs the vast majority and only lets a small, controlled amount out in the urine. But as you age, that reabsorption machinery gets leakier. So you are taking less in at the top, absorbing a smaller fraction of that, and losing more out the bottom. 3 strikes, all from the simple fact of getting older. And not one of them shows up on a routine physical. And now the third force, which is the one I promised you at the very beginning, the pill you swallow every morning with your coffee. Because for a huge number of people over 50, the single biggest drain on their magnesium is not their diet and not even their age. It is their medication. And I want to be very careful here, because I am not telling you to stop taking anything. I am telling you to understand what your prescriptions are doing, so you can have a real conversation with your doctor instead of a shrug. Let me walk through the main offenders. The biggest one, by sheer number of people affected, is a class of drugs for water retention and blood pressure called diuretics, water pills. If you have high blood pressure, heart failure, or swelling in your legs, there's an excellent chance you are on one. The most common type, the loop diuretics like furosemide, which you might know by the brand name Lasix, and the thiazide diuretics, work by forcing your kidneys to dump sodium and water. But the kidney cannot dump sodium and water cleanly. It dumps magnesium and potassium right along with it. Loop diuretics in particular directly interfere with the exact part of the kidney tubule where magnesium is reabsorbed. So, a drug that many people take every single morning is, by its very mechanism, a magnesium flushing machine. It is doing its job on your blood pressure while quietly draining the mineral your muscles need to relax. And then, that same person lies down at night and wonders why their calf seizes up. The second major offender is a class of drugs you might not suspect at all because they are for your stomach. Proton pump inhibitors. These are the heartburn and acid reflux drugs, medicines like omeprazole, brand name Prilosec, and esomeprazole, brand name Nexium. Tens of millions of people take these, many of them for years and years, often long after they needed to. Here is the problem. Your gut absorbs magnesium partly in an environment that depends on stomach acid. Proton pump inhibitors shut down acid production. That is the whole point of them. But in doing so, over long-term use, they impair your ability to absorb magnesium from your food. This is not a fringe theory. Back in 2011, the United States Food and Drug Administration issued a formal safety communication warning that long-term use of proton pump inhibitors, generally treatment lasting a year or longer, can cause low magnesium levels, a condition called hypomagnesemia, and that in some cases, magnesium supplements alone were not enough to fix it, and patients had to come off the drug. That is, the FDA, not a supplement salesman, telling you that a common heartburn pill can drain this mineral so thoroughly that pills cannot keep up. And how many people on those drugs have ever been told that? Almost none. So now you can see the full picture, and it is a genuinely alarming stack. A person over 50 eating a modern refined diet that is low in magnesium to begin with, whose aging gut absorbs less of it, and whose aging kidneys hold on to less of it, who is also taking a water pill that flushes it out, and maybe a heartburn pill that blocks its absorption. Every single one of these forces points in the same direction. Down. It would be more surprising if that person did not cramp at night than if they did. The 2:40 a.m. cramp is not a mystery. It is the predictable output of a system that has been drained from 5 directions at once. Now, at this point, you are probably thinking exactly what any reasonable person would think. Fine, if the problem is low magnesium, I will just buy magnesium. There is an entire aisle of it at the pharmacy. Problem solved. And this is the moment where I promised to do something most health videos refuse to do. I am going to show you the 2 major studies that tested that exact, obvious fix and found it mostly failed. Because if I just told you to go buy a bottle of magnesium and sent you on your way, I would be doing the same lazy thing everyone else does. And I would be setting a lot of you up for disappointment. Let me start with the biggest and most careful review of the evidence. The gold standard for this kind of question is something called a Cochrane review. Cochrane is an international group of researchers whose entire job is to gather up all the good quality trials on a medical question and pool them together ruthlessly to see what the combined evidence actually says, with no product to sell. They published a review specifically on magnesium for muscle cramps, and when they pulled together the randomized controlled trials on older adults with ordinary nighttime leg cramps, the kind we have been talking about, the verdict was blunt. For older adults, magnesium supplementation was unlikely to provide meaningful cramp relief. The difference between the people who took real magnesium and the people who took a dummy placebo pill was small and statistically unconvincing. One of the well-known trials inside that body of evidence gave older adults magnesium citrate for a month and compared it head-to-head with placebo and found no significant reduction in the number of cramps, the intensity of the cramps, or the duration of the cramps. People took the pill faithfully, and their legs seized up just as often. Now sit with how strange that seems. We just spent 15 minutes proving, at the level of the individual muscle cell, that magnesium is the stop signal, that low magnesium removes the brake, that the entire cramp mechanism runs through this one mineral. And then the studies say that giving people the mineral in a pill mostly does not work. How can both of those things be true at the same time? This is the single most important question in the whole video, and the answer is where the real solution finally comes into view. Remember the number I told you to hold on to near the beginning? Less than 1% of your body's magnesium is in your bloodstream? And here is a second, equally important fact. When you take a standard magnesium pill, your body only absorbs a fraction of it, and a poorly absorbed form like magnesium oxide, which is one of the cheapest and most common on the shelf, might deliver only a small percentage of its magnesium into you, while the rest passes straight through and gives you nothing but loose stools. That laxative effect you may have experienced is literally the unabsorbed magnesium pulling water into your intestine on its way out. So a big chunk of that cheap pill never even enters your body. But the deeper problem is not just absorption. It is where the magnesium needs to go. Your cramping calf muscle does not need magnesium in your blood. It needs magnesium inside the muscle cell, packed into the tissue, sitting at the pump that clears the calcium. And getting magnesium from a pill into the blood and then transported across the cell membrane and stored inside the muscle where it actually does its work is a slow process that takes weeks to months of consistent, adequate intake. It is like trying to refill a deep underground reservoir by pouring a cup of water on the surface. A quick supplement raises your blood level for a few hours. Your kidney sees the temporary spike, and if you are older with leaky kidneys, dumps a lot of the excess out in your urine, and very little of it ever makes it down into the muscle stores that are actually depleted. That is why a 4-week trial of a pill shows nothing. The pill is aiming at the wrong target, in the wrong form, over the wrong timescale. So what does that failure actually tell us? It tells us something genuinely useful, and it is the opposite of the just buy a bottle advice. It tells us that the real solution is not to spike the mineral, it is to stop the leak and rebuild the reservoir slowly. Go back to those 3 forces. The reason the pill fails is that it does nothing about why you are losing magnesium in the first place. If your water pill is flushing it out every single morning, no supplement is going to win a tug of war against a drug that is actively pulling in the other direction. If your heartburn medication is blocking absorption, throwing more magnesium at a blocked gut is like pouring water into a clogged funnel. The pill treats the symptom, the low level, while ignoring the mechanism, the leak. And that is exactly why the smart move sits somewhere the supplement aisle can never reach. So let me lay out where the real solution actually sits, because this is the part you can act on this week. First, and most powerfully, this is the reason to have a specific, informed conversation with your doctor about your medications. Not to stop them, but to ask precise questions. If you are on a diuretic, you can ask whether a potassium and magnesium-sparing option is appropriate for your situation. Because there are diuretics like amiloride and spironolactone that are designed to hold on to these minerals rather than dump them. And sometimes a doctor will combine them for exactly that reason. If you have been on a proton pump inhibitor for years, you can ask whether you still need it at that dose, or at all, or whether a step down is possible. Because so many people stay on those drugs by inertia long after the original reason has passed. When you walk in and say, "I have been reading about magnesium wasting with diuretics and long-term acid blockers, and I have nighttime cramps. Can we check my level and look at my medications?" You have just transformed a 7-minute shrug into a real clinical conversation. You have named the mechanism. Doctors respond to that. Second, understand that food beats pills here, and not for some mystical reason. When magnesium comes packaged inside real food, spinach, pumpkin seeds, black beans, almonds, whole grains, it arrives slowly, alongside fiber and other minerals, in a form and a rhythm your gut is built to absorb and your body is built to store. You are not spiking the blood and losing it to the urine. You are trickling it into the reservoir the way it was always meant to be filled. A handful of pumpkin seeds carries a serious dose of magnesium. A cup of cooked spinach delivers a large fraction of your daily need. A square of genuinely dark chocolate, the high cocoa kind, is one of the most magnesium-rich indulgences you can have, which is a rare piece of good news in nutrition. Rebuilding the store is a project of weeks and months of these foods showing up on your plate consistently, and that patient, slow refill is precisely what the 4-week pill trials could never capture. Third, if you and your doctor do decide a supplement makes sense, and for some people it genuinely does, the form matters enormously. Skip the cheap magnesium oxide that mostly passes through you. The better absorbed forms are the ones bound to an organic molecule: magnesium citrate, magnesium glycinate, magnesium malate. Magnesium glycinate in particular is gentle on the stomach and less likely to send you running to the bathroom, which matters if you are trying to take it consistently over months. and it should be taken as a steady daily habit, not a rescue pill you reach for the night a cramp hits, because by 2:40 in the morning, it is far too late for a capsule to reach the muscle. Now, I promised you one more thing at the start, and it is the connection almost nobody has ever explained to you, the one between this mineral and your nightly trips to the bathroom. This works in two directions, and both of them matter. In the first direction, think about what happens when you are up 2, 3, 4 times a night to urinate, a condition called nocturia that becomes extremely common over 50. Every one of those trips is not just water leaving your body. Minerals ride out with it, and magnesium is one of them. So the very same pattern that shreds your sleep is also quietly draining the mineral that keeps your muscles calm. And if you are on a diuretic, especially one taken later in the day, you have doubled the effect. You are both flushing more magnesium and interrupting your sleep, and the cramps arrive in the gap. This is why so many people describe the same miserable cluster: up to the bathroom at 1:40, back to bed, and the calf locks at 2:40. Those two events are not a coincidence. They are downstream of the same drain. But there is a second direction to this connection, and it is a warning that could genuinely spare you a bad night. Remember that magnesium, especially in the wrong form and the wrong dose, is a laxative. It pulls water into the gut. Now, less commonly discussed, but just as real, taking magnesium can also affect your bladder and your fluid balance, and taking any supplement or drinking large volumes late in the evening in an attempt to fix cramps can put you right back up out of bed to urinate. So the person who hears, "take magnesium and drink more water," and does both at 10 at night can end up trading a cramp for 3 bathroom trips, and then, because those trips flush minerals, end up right back where they started.
The timing and the form are everything. If you supplement, you take it earlier. You take a well-absorbed, gentle form, and you do not try to fix a months-long deficiency by chugging fluids and pills right before bed. And here is the second-order implication that ties this whole thing together, because it is bigger than cramps. Everything I have described, the low intake, the aging gut and kidneys, the diuretics, the acid blockers, the bathroom trips draining minerals, all of it is a slow, invisible depletion of a mineral that runs 300 to 600 reactions in your body. The cramp is just the loudest alarm. It is the symptom you cannot ignore because it wakes you up in agony. But the same shortage that makes your calf seize can show up in other ways that are quieter and easier to blame on age, poor sleep, that restless, wired but tired feeling, muscle twitches under the eye or in the hands, a general sense that your body's recovery is not what it was. When you address the root, the intake, the absorption, the leak, you are not just chasing one cramp. You are refilling a reservoir that a lot of your body quietly depends on. The 2:40 a.m. cramp was never really the problem. It was the messenger. And now you know how to read the message, where it comes from, why the obvious pill mostly fails, and where the real fix actually sits, which is upstream, in your food, in your prescriptions, and in a slow, patient rebuild that no 4-week study was ever going to see. If this explains something no one has ever taken the time to explain to you, do me one favor. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button because it genuinely helps more people over 50 find this instead of the 7-minute shrug, and I will see you in the next